Hello makers, Ruth here. In this video, we're going to be making some painted coasters, but we're going to be using the art of artist Alma Thomas as our inspiration today. So Alma Thomas was an abstract expressionist painter. Abstract expressionism is all about this idea that colors can help convey meaning, they can convey emotion. And I think that's definitely something that Thomas used in her work. She was the first African American woman to have a solo exhibit at the Whitney in New York. So she is a groundbreaker for sure. And she's one of the first African American women to have their art in the White House's permanent collection, thanks to the Obamas. One of her pieces, this one down here at the bottom, The Resurrection, was in the family dining room in a place of honor, right? So people from all over the world were able to see her work there, which is really exciting. And then her other piece that was in the White House during the time of the Obamas was Skylight, which was in the First Lady's office. There are two pieces here that may look familiar. The Eclipse is one of my favorite, and Starry Night and the Astronauts. I love the Eclipse for several reasons. One, there's something that's really soothing about this circular pattern. It feels good. It's something that inspires me for sure. And this other one, if you've ever been to the Art Institute in Chicago in the modern wing, you may have seen this one hanging. Her work has been compared to Byzantine mosaics. It looks like, because of her style, those brush strokes that she makes, it looks a lot like the practice of mosaics. Mosaics is all about taking glass pieces and putting them together to make one cohesive piece. So it's like collage for glass. What she does and what we're going to be doing today is taking paintbrush and using those little marks to create this cohesive piece. Right? So I just wanted to show some of her examples. These two pieces here are from a series that she did centered around the moon landing. So a lot of her work is inspired by nature, inspired by the sky and space, and she was really influenced by the moon landing for sure. If you have the opportunity to look up more of her work, I definitely recommend it. She is an incredible woman, incredibly talented, and her work, if you have the chance to see it in person, I highly recommend it. In the pictures, they just don't do it justice. When you see it in person, you get to see all the wonderful layers and colors that she uses in these paintings for sure. So I just wanted to point out some of her work, and I'm going to be using that as my inspiration today. You can see by the example that I have here that I was very much inspired by her eclipse painting. I just wanted to show some examples and also talk about how, we're doing a set. We're doing 4 coasters. So you can have a repeating pattern where they all look exactly the same, or you can do variations in a pattern, kind of like what I did here, where I have the same colors going in the same order, but I just kind of started in different areas. So I definitely want to encourage exploration, experimentation, and play when it comes to mixing our colors and creating our coasters today. So I'm going to move these out of the way and let's talk supplies. So our first supply that we need, it's very helpful, is our illustrated instruction. We're doing painted mosaic coasters, just like all our other illustrated instructions. We have our list of supplies at the top that we're going over right now, and then that process laid out step by step. This is a great recipe card to follow along with, take notes on, and refer back to. So if you have your illustrated instructions, definitely pull that out and work alongside it. Of course, the first thing that we need is going to be our coasters. We've got 4 cork coasters that we're using for this project. This project, you can also use wooden coasters, you can use tile, you can use ceramics. This process also works on all of those. We're doing coasters because they're lightweight and a little forgiving. And they're very porous, so they'll soak up some paint, but they're really great to work with, really great coasters. So go ahead and pull out your coasters. The next thing we need is going to be our acrylic paint. Now our paint set comes with a variety of colors and 2 paint brushes. We have the wide flat brush and the small round brush. Both of these brushes I'm going to be using in the process today. The wide flat one is for covering large spaces, and the small round one is for doing details. Both of them are going to be really helpful. The next thing we need is going to be our Mod Podge and silver-handled brush. We're going to be using this as a sealant today, so after we're all done with our painting and our paint has had time to dry, we're going to hop over and do some Mod Podge. It takes a while, but I'll show how to do it in this video for later on. All right, so the main things we need out of our kit are our coasters, our paint and paintbrushes, our Mod Podge, and silver-handled brush. Now, there are a couple things that we need that are outside of the kit, not included in the kit, that are really helpful to have. First of which is a cup of water and a rag. Because we're using paint, we're going to need water to clean our brush, especially if we're using different colors. So having a little glass of water and a rag or paper towel can be really helpful. The next thing that's really helpful, but not absolutely necessary, is a little palette. These are a couple that I got at the dollar store. You can use these or something like this, or you can use a paper plate, you can use foil, they're cardboard, and there are a lot of things you can do, use as your palette. And the last thing I want to talk about before we start our process is protecting our space and protecting our body. So acrylic paint isn't necessarily a messy supply, but accidents do happen. So it's always good to prepare our space. Now, I'll generally work off a piece of foil when I'm doing today, working off my piece of foil. It just helps me contain my mess. It's also good to protect your body. So I'll be using an apron, but it's good to wear clothes you don't mind getting messy just for that purpose. And of course, our hands. You have a set of disposable gloves in your kit. Feel free to use those. If you do, however, get acrylic paint on your hands, know that it comes off with a little soap and water, so it doesn't stain, which is really nice. All right, so let's jump in. One of the first things I want to talk about before we start painting is our color wheel here. I want to talk about mixing paints. In our paint set, we have a few colors. We don't have a lot, but we have a little bit of a variety. But maybe we want to use colors that we don't have. Maybe we want to use a few shades of blue or a few shades of red. Then mixing colors can be really helpful. So I want to use our color wheel as kind of a starting place. If this is something that you know, hopefully this will be a nice little refresher, and then we'll move on to our painting process. But our color wheel, and here's an example, we start off with our three primary colors. Okay? We have red, we have yellow, and we have blue. Now I'm using a true red, a true yellow, and a true blue, but you can use different shades of this for this practice too. Now, these are our primary colors. And what that means is that they are the originals, right? There's no colors that you can mix to make this color. And so these are primary. But that red, yellow, and blue, you can mix together to create your secondary colors. Those secondary colors are going to be orange, green, and purple. So we do our mixing together. If I'm mixing my two primary colors, my yellow and red, I'm going to get a shade of orange. Right? So whenever you're mixing your colors together, one thing to keep in mind is that you generally want to start off with more of your lighter color and less of your darker color. You can do variations with that for sure. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of red or a little bit of yellow and a little bit of red. Mix that together, and you can see my little extra bit of yellow helped to make this nice orange color. This is one of my secondary colors. Okay. I can also mix that yellow and blue to create a green. So I can take, again, more of that yellow, a little less of that blue, and mix it together to get a really nice shade of green. I can also mix my blue and red to create a purple. So I'm going to take a little more of my red, a little bit of my blue, and create this purple color. Now, to lighten or darken our colors, we generally want to add white or black, but not always do we have white and black in our paint set. So we can use our color wheel to help us lighten or darken some of our colors. So if I want different shades of red or different shades of yellow, I'm going to look at the color wheel and see what's next to them. And that's what I can add together to create some of those value changes, right? So if I want a different shade of red, I can add a little bit of this orange to get a tertiary color. Tertiary colors are mixes of a secondary and a primary color. So that secondary color orange and that primary color red, I can mix those together to get an in-between color. And there's a whole range. I can use more orange, less red, less orange. I can mix up that and get a whole range of color there. And the same too with adding purple. If I want to darken my red, I can add some of that purple, a little bit of my blue, and that'll darken that color up. Adding those secondary colors with that primary color gives me a tertiary color, which can be a wide range of color. So this is something to kind of keep in mind when we are doing some painting. Easy ways to lighten or darken your value depending on the colors that you have in hand. I will say one of the things that's really helpful about the color wheel too is that it does show us complementary colors. Complementary colors are the opposite colors on the color wheel. So the opposite color of red is going to be green. The opposite color of yellow, purple, and the opposite color of orange is blue. So if we mix our complementary colors, we get a shade of brown. So we have even more range of color. If you're wanting to do something nature focused, think about that. Nature has a lot of green in it, right? So making a brown that fits with different shades of green, I can mix my green with red and have a very natural shadow, a really natural looking brown color. So having a color wheel handy is really helpful. It gives us a little guidance on what colors we can mix together to create other colors. So just wanted to kind of point that out while we start our painting here. Definitely feel free to experiment with color, using different colors to create other colors. It can be a lot of fun exploring that, but this is really helpful. I'm going to set this aside. Let's start our painting. Now, to do my coasters, we're doing a set of 4. So one of the things that I found helpful is to line all 4 of them up and work on them all at the same time. Then I can use one color on each of my squares and then change a color and use that on each of my squares. It's a little more methodical, but it can feel good to do it that way. I'm also going to be taking inspiration from Alma Thomas's work. She uses a lot of circles in her work, and circles can feel very meditative. They can feel very soothing. And so that's what I'm going to be doing with my coasters today, starting with that circle. Okay, so I'm going to start off by getting my water handy and my rack and getting my paint. And I'm just going to open up my red, my yellow, and my blue. So I'm going to be mixing colors today. So I'm going to start off, actually, I mixed some blue and some red to create this really nice purple just a moment ago. So I'm actually going to use that as my center, my starting place. So I'm just going to use my wide flat brush. I'm going to cover a little bit of space here, and I'm going to use that to find my center point. So I'm going to get that pigment on my brush, that little bit of purple on my brush, and then just pick anywhere on my coaster as my starting place. So it doesn't have to be in the center. Maybe going to the side. I'm just going to create a little circle. I'm going to use that same pigment just across the board, starting with my little circle, changing position, going in different places. I also would like to say that we don't have to be perfect. I know, especially when we're doing something with the circle, we want it to be a smooth curve, right? But it's hard sometimes, especially if you have shaky hands like I do. It's hard to get those smooth curves, those straight lines. And so I definitely recommend just kind of going with the flow here. It doesn't have to be perfect. One of the things that I talk about in a lot of my groups is this wonderful Japanese idea of wabi-sabi. And it's this idea that there's beauty in the imperfection. It doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be. And there's beauty in that because the truth is when we start focusing on making it right and getting all the right steps, we miss out on the enjoyment and the benefits we get from the act itself of painting. Okay. So enjoy the process. Wabi sabi. So I've started my first dot. I've done that kind of dark purple, and so I'm going to kind of continue it out, adding other colors. Now, there are a couple ways to use our brush. That wide flat brush, we can use it in a couple ways here. We can either paint it flat like this and get a line that way, or we can turn it on its side where it's narrow and get a slightly more narrow mark. We can also use our small round brush to get thinner lines too, so we can have quite a variation in color. Now, I've got my purple here, so I'm going to start off doing a slightly lighter version of purple. Now that purple, I'm going to pull my color wheel back. That purple had a lot of red and a little bit of blue. If I want to lighten it up a little bit, of course I can add white, or I can add a little more red to lighten that up. I'm getting a nice shade of purple here. And I can use this as my next color. Like I said, have some fun with that mixing. You may find colors that you didn't even know existed. You can have some fun with that mark making. All right, so I've added a little extra red to my palette here, and I'm going to make some marks next. So I'm going to take my small round brush because I'm going to do small marks. If you are like me and your brush is kind of getting a little frayed, that point is not one point, but maybe it's multiple, you can still use this brush to get that point, that fine line. One tip is when you dip it in the paint, twist it as you pull it out, and it gives you that fine line. It gives you that point again. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. And I'm going to start off with just one square and work my way around. I'm not going to worry about making super straight lines or smooth curves. Just going to have fun with that making, that mark making. And there's something that can feel, like I said, really soothing about that mark making process. I'm just kind of taking my time. Let this be a meditative practice for you. Just like the mandala making, we can do one row at a time, one layer at a time, and gradually build it up. And there's something that feels nice about that process. And I'm just going all the way around. And you can see I'm using the same color. I'm using the same tool, right? Getting some similar marks, but I'm not focused on getting it exactly the same. There's a variation in my pattern, in my set here. So I'm just going to take my time to make my marks. And give myself permission to enjoy the process. I'm going to clean my brush, go on to my next color. So for my next color, I think I'm going to bring in some blue. I'm going to use it straight from my palette here. Dipping that in my little paintbrush and doing the same thing, doing some small marks like this. I'm just going to follow it all the way around. And again, I want to invite us to take our time with it. If it feels better to do big marks, do big marks, big brush marks. If it feels better to do the smaller ones, do the smaller ones. Maybe it feels good to add dots, dashes. Maybe it feels better to add petals or clouds. You know, I'm talking about mixing color here and coming up with some different variations in color to add to this painting. But sometimes it's just nice to paint things our favorite color. Or maybe today just feels like a blue kind of day. And so this coaster is going to be shades of blue. And maybe tomorrow, if we're working on it, tomorrow feels like a red kind of day. And so we paint it different shades of red. I definitely want to encourage playing around with this process, but most importantly, doing what feels good to you. I am a big believer in that making can feel good. And if it doesn't feel good, it's okay not to do it. I think there is a wonderful time and place for um, protest art. In Alma Thomas's time, she received a lot of criticism in the 60s and 70s because a lot of the work was centered around protest art. It was art that made a statement, and it was important, and it was vital. It was needed. But she was someone who wanted to make art because it felt good and it was pretty. And the truth is, that's important too, and that's vital too. So make something that feels good to you, and know there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. So I've got my blue here. So I'm going to start mixing colors to get a couple different shades of blue. So I want to think about a little bit. I did my purple, I started, so I'm going to follow my color wheel here the other direction. I did purple and blue, so I'm going to do a little green, maybe a little yellow. So I'm going to start off by adding just a tiny bit of blue here and adding a little more of my yellow. Just a reminder, if you are doing a lighter color with a darker color, you want to make sure that you use more of that lighter color. It's easy to add darker color. Darker color a little bit goes a long way, but it's a little harder to add that lighter color on top of that darker color. I'm gonna add a little more yellow here and just kind of blend that in. Mixing it in my palette. Got a really nice yellowy green here. I'm just going to take my tiny brush again and just go around making some little brush marks, adding that little bit of green, and then I'm going to have some fun with some yellow. I'm using just my small round brush here, but if you have other paint brushes, feel free to bring those in and experiment with those brush marks as well. You can get different shapes and different sizes just by changing up your brush, the type of brush you're using. But you can also get different shapes and different sizes by varying the pressure on your brush. If I use more pressure, I get a thicker line. If I use less pressure, I get a more delicate, thin line. And that's true for any brush you use. The more pressure you add, the more it changes that brush stroke. So definitely have some fun with this process. Leave room for experimentation. Add a little more yellow to my palette here. Still adding some more and mixing that in. Lightening up my yellow or my green just a little bit. Again, I'm thinking about the colors that are next to it on the color wheel. If I added more blue, that would darken my green up. If I added more yellow, it lightens it up. So I'm going to take my wide brush here, and I'm going to use it on the side. That's going to give me a variation in my mark. I'm just going to kind of carry that around. Even adding a little bit of another color can change the color you're mixing, it can change it by a lot. So I'm just going to go all the way around, adding my little brush marks. You can have some fun changing it up. Short marks, wide marks. Have some fun experimenting. I'm going to continue adding colors, changing my color palette here. I'm going to do a little more of my yellow and do a tiny bit of my green. So it's a mostly yellow color. I get a lime green color that way. I'm going to add to my palette too. So I'd invite you to do the same. Start adding those colors, whether it's the big brush marks, little brush marks. Now I'm just adding colors to my palette, lightening it up with yellow, and really just kind of going around my color wheel. Like I said, that gives us kind of an indicator of what colors we can mix and how we can change our colors. Those are good colors for mixing. One thing you may find that as you are using it, that you're or doing your painting, that you may find that your water is getting to be a kind of a muddy color. It's good to change out that water whenever it starts to get really dark, because we want our brush to be mostly clean when we put it in new colors. Mhm. So I'm going to go ahead for this next one. I'm going to go to my small brush. I'm just going to do some straight yellow right from my palette. I'm changing up my mark making. So I'm doing some varying colors, of course, but also doing some different length of marks, doing different size marks, and having some fun kind of playing around with that, changing it up. Um, so again, I just want to encourage playing around with your mark making too. Making something that feels good to you is good. So I'm just taking my time, building it layer by layer. If sometimes you find a color that you really like, know that you can do multiple layers of it. I like the yellow, so I'm going to go back. I did the yellow with my narrow brush, my round brush. I'm going to go back with my wide flat brush and do some yellow marks too before moving on to another color. Again, I'm just kind of varying how I'm holding my brush, the pressure I'm using to make the marks, just kind of varying that a little bit. There are some times that, as our paint is drying, you may find that that the color is lighter than you wanted. So it may be good to paint another layer on top. Yellow is a really light color, and so sometimes it gets lighter when it dries. And we're working off of something that is really porous too. So if you do find after it dries that this is much lighter than I'd like it to be, that's okay. Um, Acrylic paint is nice because you can always paint on top of it. So even if it's dry, you can do more painting. Sometimes it's nice um, to paint a background color. If you'll notice Thomas's work, she paints lots of layers. So it's not just the one layer of mosaics. Of paint, but she paints often a base coat and then paints these marks on top of it. So if you want to do a base coat of white or black. It'll really make your colors pop that you use. But you can also do a base coat of yellow or a base coat of blue. Those are also really good too. They make a nice undercoat, base coat. Also, I like using acrylic paint because it is very forgiving. So you can paint on top of it. If you get done with this process and you decide that, you know what, I used a lot of green here and I really want to use more red, all we can do is just paint a layer of white on top of it after it dries and then start over again. Acrylic paint lets you paint on top, which is really nice. And the sealant that we're using, you can paint on top of that, which is also really nice. Um, so I'm just going to kind of add a little bit of red to my yellow here, and create my final color that I'm going to go around with. I'm just going to take my paintbrush. I got a little yellow. I'm going to do a little red in here and just kind of mix that in. It's lightened up my yellow or lightened up my red. That little bit of red has really changed, has drastically changed my yellow. But I'm going to use that to kind of finish out my paintings. So I'm just going to get a little bit on my brush and do that last round of color. You can see I'm doing the circle because I like the way that looks. But also, you can see part of my circle is kind of off um, the cork, right? And that's okay. Um, being off-centered like that can look nice. So don't feel bad if it's not completely even. There's still something nice about it being off-centered a little bit. And absolutely nothing wrong with that. And so I'm just kind of finishing out my coaster by adding that last layer. That's that last mark here. Do that here. Now I'm just painting the top of my coaster. You can paint the sides if you want, but it's not that important to do that. So I'm going to let this dry completely. Once this dries completely, we can come back and do our ceiling. So feel free to pause the video here and I'll see you back here in just a little bit. Welcome back. Now that our paint is dry, let's talk about sealing. So what we're using today is our Mod Podge and our silver handle brush. Now there are other things that you can use if you don't have Mod Podge or you run out of Mod Podge. You can use a clear nail polish, that also works. And you can use a glue water mixture. So 1 part glue to 1 part, like Elmer's glue, to 1 part water. You mix that up and you have a sealant there too. So there are a couple ways to create your sealant. You can also use other sealants like polyurethane or epoxy or UV resin. Those all work well too. But I like Mod Podge, and I think it's like the magic art supply. So that's what I'm going to be using today. Now, we want to make sure that our paint is completely dry before we add that Mod Podge. And that's because if we start adding that Mod Podge while it's still wet, that Mod Podge, because it's liquid, will blend with the acrylic. And so what happens is that your Mod Podge will be tinted. Now our Mod Podge goes on clear, glows on cloudy, but it ends up clear. And so if we do mix it with other like wet paint, other pigment, it starts to change that color so it no longer dries clear. So what I do is I pour a little Mod Podge into my cap, my Mod Podge cap, and then I'll get that Mod Podge on my brush. And what we want to do are quick strokes. And so I'm just going to kind of go quickly and cover that surface. We don't want to spend a lot of time because we don't want to change the color, but we want to make sure that the surface is covered. The more layers of Mod Podge, the more protected our coaster is, right? So we want to do multiple layers. We'll let this dry, and once it dries, we can come back to that and do another layer. Now, our paint will take about 15-ish minutes to dry completely, but that Mod Podge will take an hour or longer. And I would say the average amount of time would probably be about 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours for it to dry. And the good number of layers will be about 3-ish layers. Again, the more layers you do, the more protected your piece is going to be. Well, happy painting, everyone. We'll see you soon.